Hello, and welcome back to the Road to 2000. As always, my name is Caleb Denby, and I will be your driver on this journey. Tonight, I wanted to talk about the King's Indian defense again from the white side, but rather than continue the series, which got put on a little bit of a pause, where I try to refute that opening, ran into some roadblocks there. Turns out the King's Indian is pretty good. Tonight, I wanted to talk about a system that Varuzhan Akobian has used to great success for quite a long time now. And it's going to be not quite as testing, as forcing as the lines I was recommending, but I thought it would be fun to look at this system at a few different levels of chess. So to introduce the opening, I'm going to start with the man Var Akobian himself. I'm going to go through one of his games from quite a while back, I think 2005, just to introduce this opening, some of the ideas, and what we're going to be looking at tonight. And there might be a surprise game in store after this, so stay tuned. But Var, of course, starts with d4. We get into the King's Indian defense, following g6, knight c3, bishop g7, knight f3, and castles. So you're probably familiar with this position. This one happens all the time. And very, very commonly, white goes e4. And I was recommending those classical lines where you go bishop e2, castles, and knight e1, and you get those fun, exciting games where black is racing to checkmate you on the king's side, you're trying to checkmate black on the queen's side, and it's a lot of fun. But Var has, for a long time, played this interesting move, bishop to g5. So what do you guys think about this move? I hate those little annotations on board. Had to get rid of them. What do you think about bishop g5? What's going on with this move? What could be the idea? What do you think?
Yeah, so just first of all, getting your bishop out
Yeah.
and attacking the knight, but it seems a bit like it's overextending.
Yeah, so we're often told that bishops are long-range pieces, and especially in queen's pawn openings, where you start with the d pawn, it makes sense to develop this bishop kind of last, because this bishop is already pretty active here. It's aiming at a lot of squares on this diagonal. And if it comes out to a square like g5, you're totally right in thinking that, hey, this bishop might get harassed. It's sort of in enemy territory, and it's going to allow things like maybe h6 or something later on to gain some tempi against this piece. So it is very much a counterintuitive move. We're not used to seeing white develop this bishop so early. So whenever you do something counterintuitive, there normally is a very distinct idea behind it. So Var has this really distinct idea, and that's the reason why he played bishop g5. And the reason for that is that after the move d6, he was planning to play this move e3 the whole time. Not going for these e4 systems, but instead playing e3. And his point is, yeah, maybe I didn't want to go bishop g5. It is counterintuitive. It's not natural. But if I want to play the move e3, I really need my bishop outside the pawn chain rather than inside the pawn chain on c1. So that's why you see this move bishop g5. But it's important to understand you don't just play bishop g5 to develop the bishop. Play bishop g5 because you have this plan of playing e3, and you want the bishop outside the pawn chain. So black in this game does play d6, and we're going to be analyzing most position. Tonight we're going to be analyzing the positions that occur after d6. It is worth noting, I think in Bologun's book, he recommends this move c5 against this line. And then you get into some Benoni kind of structures after d5. You're still going to play e3 a lot of the time, and it's just going to make for an interesting game. Black should be doing OK. Instead, though, we're going to see d6, and this is sort of by far the most common move in the database. And I'm going to say that white might actually end up with a little bit of an advantage here. So to continue on, we see this move e3. So now we know why bishop g5 was played. White wanted to play e3. But this sort of raises a new question. Why do we want our pawn on e3? Why not leave this pawn on e4? More space should be better. So why e3? What's the big deal? What's the big deal here? Yeah, so it's supporting this pawn on d4, but more importantly than that, we're going to see that white is striving to improve upon certain lines of the king's Indian defense, where black ends up making use of this d4 square. So once you go e4, there's the cliche saying, pawns don't move backwards, meaning once you move a pawn forward, it can never step back and defend those squares that it was once able to defend. And what white is saying is that he would rather have this pawn on e3 to defend this d4 square and some critical lines. To give you an example of some of those lines, let's put some moves on the board. Specifically here, let's go ahead and, we can play d takes e5 right away. Well, actually, let's castle. Well, OK, how do I want to get there? Let's say the knight d7 lines. And now d takes e5, d takes e5. So this is an example of a line that's actually not so good for white. And the reason for that is black has successfully made his claim on these dark squares, and in the very near future, you can expect to see knight c5 to e6 to d4. Once this knight lands on d4, it's actually black who is very seriously fighting for big advantages. Alternatively, very common is rook e8, knight f8, knight e6, knight d4. Lots of ways to get to this d4 square. So what Var is saying with this move e3 is that after e5, probably eventually white is planning to capture this pawn. And then, we're not going to play it here, obviously. But the point is, in those similar lines, black is not going to have this d4 square available. It's going to be contested. And that is actually what Var manages to do in this game. So let's see how he does it. So black plays knight b to d7, preparing e5, bishop e2, and black even plays c6 and queen c7 to prepare this move even further. So in the meantime, Var gets his pieces off the back row, uses this queen to support the e4 square, uses this bishop just to get developed so you can castle, think about defending this knight coming out this way. We see castles and e5. So what do you think white should play in this position? What should we do here? Keeping in mind the point of our play. The point is, we want to get improved versions of lines where the d4 square is important. Yeah, so black just broke with this move e5, and we're trying to find some way to make use of this e3 pawn. You want to push? Yeah, so pushing is one option. And there's many good moves here, so let's throw some out, just get some ideas.
Rook a d1.
Yeah, rook a d1 is very good. Also very intuitive is maybe rook f d1. Or just takes. So these are the moves that we really need to decide between here. And I'm not going to lie, I think most of these are playable, but one of these options I think is a little bit less coherent with our plan. So I don't really like this idea of playing the move d5 here. And the reason for that is this pawn on e3 is now sort of useless, and our bishop is actually just sort of out of place. If we are going to lock the center down anyways, why not have this pawn on e4, just helping us support this d5 break? That just doesn't make sense with our previous play. However, supporting the center with a rook to d1 is good, and I also think that taking right away on e5 is very, very reasonable here. Because again, our goal is to get to these kinds of positions where black's main plan of getting a knight to d4 is just no longer feasible. In the game, Var did choose rook f to d1. And after rook to e8, he goes ahead and plays this move, rook a to c1 as well. And now I think black might have had an opportunity to steer the game closer towards equality. after this, this next decision here, I think black sort of started to lose the grip on the position already. Things started to get kind of nasty. So black to move here, and not fully equalize, but at least give himself a good plan. Ooh, okay, so c5 is interesting, but that's actually going to make our plan even stronger, I think. So the problem with c5 is the same problem with e4. Not that e4 in the opening is like a bad move, but the problem is it leaves squares behind, and that's what Var is hoping to avoid. So with c5, I have no doubt Var would be planning to take e5, and again, we're going to get this position. Now we have this square defended, and black does not have this square defended. So white's just going to have an easy advantage here. It's all about this square. And in fact here, white might even be able to take it a step further, jump into the next square up. So c5 gives away too much. We need these squares under control. What do you think?
I feel like taking would be good, but I don't know if fetching back with the knight would just that they'd be able to keep the same plan.
Yeah, so e takes d4. I think this is the route that black should have taken. Now, even here, white's going to be pretty happy that this pawn is still on e3. With the pawn on e4, sometimes you'll see this knight come under fire with this bishop on g7. So this pawn on e3 is still going to be useful here. But at the very least, black is going to have squares to put the pieces on, right? Black is going to get developed, maybe play for a d5 break at some point, and we'll at least have some ideas in the game. I do think white is still a little bit better, but I think that this was the way that black should have tried to fight. Instead, if you tried this move e4, I think some people in the chat were talking about this. I think you get into trouble right away. That's actually, Var has cleverly placed his rooks very well to deal with this idea. Because now this pawn is attacked 3 times, and I think if you go here, we have a pretty nice tactic to win material immediately. So white to move in and win here. It's not horribly complicated. It's just a nasty tactic.
Pawn takes, and then whoever takes back, you take back with the knight, and if they take the queen, if you take your queen, then you take their knight check.
Yeah, so I initially thought that this might work, but I think actually you sort of trick yourself here. I might have misled you with the word tactic. Here, I think you run into trouble. If you take the queen back, they take your knight. And if you take on f6, if knight takes f6, then this has worked out well for us. But yeah, bishop takes, and then this bishop does prove to be a liability. And that's something you have to look out for. This bishop is overextended, like we said. However, I think white has a number of really good moves here. And actually, maybe we can reverse the order of our idea and take on f6 first. So now, no matter what takes, be it knight or bishop, we can take on d5. Now if queen takes, takes. And if bishop takes, still takes. And just to show what happens here, if you take the knight instead, I am happy to take on c7. I get my piece back. I'm up a pawn. My rooks are horribly active, and this pawn is going to be a bit weak. So we do win a pawn outright. I think white has other moves here as well. Queen b3 is probably quite good. Knight b5 is probably quite good, with a threat of a fork, just forcing all of black's pieces to really awkward squares. Can't be too bad. And this would actually hang this pawn. Maybe you even have to play like this ugly, ugly move. But yeah, probably bishop f6 here is the simplest. So pushing forward doesn't really work. Black just gets overextended. So I do think that this was the way to go. Instead, black opted to keep the tension with knight to f8. And now Var says, OK, you had enough chances to take on d4 and go for that kind of position. No, he doesn't. He plays b4 first. OK, so black could still go for this idea of e takes d4, and maybe he should. But maybe he's already gone a step in the wrong direction. No longer has knight c5. It's already sort of gone. So instead, bishop f5, queen to b3, and then black plays this move, knight to e4. OK, so now it's white's turn again. Our next move is going to be pretty clear, actually. We don't really want black to capture our bishop. So, and if we move it out of the way, we don't really want to draw one of our major pieces onto the same diagonal as this bishop. So white takes, and then Var goes ahead and takes on e5. So this is the idea that we've been angling towards. And Var played all these preparatory moves just to make sure he could get a definite advantage after the capture. So once again, I sort of blew by things there. So b4, the point of this is pretty clear. We want to gain space on the queen side, and we'll see what his intentions are. But his intentions are to make d takes e5 a better move with this idea of b4. So OK, we get here, takes, and now Var plays one more tempo move with knight d2, forcing this bishop away. And now what was the point of b4? If you're familiar with these kinds of positions, then you'll already know this idea. White's ideas are going to be the same as in the positions where our pawn is on e4. It's just that in this case, we sort of get a better version because we have eliminated black's ideas. So white to move here, what's our plan? And the Truth ICC is in the chats. Good friend of mine from a long, long time ago. And he has the right idea. Any ideas from the in-person crowd? What to do here? So really in all of these lines where DE and DE gets played, it's going to be, the plans are going to be based around the knights. So that's why this e3 move is so powerful. Black's knight maneuver is just broken. It just doesn't work. We busted it. However, white also has a really strong knight maneuver here. Black also gets to say, no, I'm the best. I've clamped down on both these squares as well. No knight d5 for you, no knight d4 for you. But white's going to find a different square. And that square, of course, is d6. So how do we get this knight to d6?
C5.
Yeah, absolutely c5. And this is why Var had played b4 earlier on. He was preparing this idea of c5, sort of saw this position coming, wants to go here. Black tries knight to e6, hitting this bishop. We go bishop h4. And now it's sort of really clear. Just to show one more time, just for example, if we had this position, white's in major, major trouble. Major, major trouble. If we put this pawn on e4 and undevelop black's bishop, white is really suffering here because this knight is so active. And the best that you're really going to be able to do with the white pieces here is hope you can trade this guy off and give black a very powerful d4 pawn supported by the bishop, open up this file in this diagonal for black's major pieces. And white is definitely on the back foot. However, with this pawn on e3, we can go c5, and after knight e6, bishop h4. What's the story? You know, what is the point? Knight d4 just cannot be played, and that's really the power of this system. Okay, but Igor, Foygel, whoever he may be, with the black pieces, was a pretty inventive guy. He came up with this nice move g5, bishop to g3, and now what do you think his intentions were with this knight? He had some nasty ideas. Since knight d4 is no longer available, he came up with the next best thing. So black takes advantage of some tactics here, as people in the chat have it. Have to advance this knight, can't go to d4, so of course, what's the other square?
F4.
Yes, knight f4, as you say, as you say. And so what's the point? The point is, of course, if we take this knight for free, your bishop is trapped, and also I'm attacking your other bishop too. So the tactic works in like 4 different ways. So this knight is taboo, but no need to panic. White just simply plays bishop back to f1. Always play bishop f1. Someone, I think, has said that before me. Okay. So now we have this position. Black is like, yes, I got my knight to f4, but the fact of the matter is it's just not nearly as powerful on f4 as it is on d4. d4 is the only open file on the board. That's where all the action is. It's not enough for it. Puts some pressure on the position, but it's sort of dominated by this bishop on f1. This bishop is very comfortable back here on f1. Can't really be assailed in any way. And this knight on f4, by the way, is always going to be vulnerable to e takes f4 threats. It's not a permanent home, right? This tactic where my bishop is trapped isn't going to last the entire game. Eventually, this knight will have to move. So black came up with this idea, just bishop back to e6. And here, we're going to go queen to b1, stepping out of it. Grandmasters hate putting themselves into pins, so just queen to b1. Now black's like, OK, all right, I have to do something. I'll go f5. And here, I think Var missed a chance to be a lot better, but he came up with a good move anyways. So we'll give him credit here. He still had quite a nice advantage. The engine says that you can just take this knight now. Sometimes you should take the hanging pieces. And at the end of the day, black's going to take back. We're going to come to c4. And there's this nice line where we end up with this incredible minor piece compared to black's bishop. And this is going to be so sad. Instead, Var came up with this nice idea of knight to c4. So very intuitive. You know, maybe he didn't like the simplifications after pawn takes knight. Knight to c4, I like this move because it sticks with our game plan. It's a very human way to play. And finally, black reveals their idea. They're like, OK, my knight on f4 isn't actually doing anything here. I need to continue a pawn storm with knight to d5. So black has pretty nasty intentions again of going to f4. And now I think this is potentially one of the better moves of the game. I really like this move that Var had in mind. So Var, of course, saw this move coming. He saw that f4 was going to be black's threat. And from a distance, he had come up with this nice concept to make it just simply not work. So white to move here. And again, stop black's ideas. This move is just absolute disaster for black. Absolute disaster.
H3.
OK, you can go h3, and then you won't lose your bishop for free. But this is sort of what black wants. Black still wants to go f4. And OK, let's say you take, bishop h2. We're really not happy back here. we're not so happy about all this. Even though we didn't lose our piece, our bishop is kind of bad back here for a while, and black is, continuing to rule, getting all this space. So what white's move does is it stops this pawn storm sort of entirely and pokes sort of a ton of holes into black's position. It's not the only good move here, I should say, but it is a very nice move. Yeah, so you're looking for some way to stop this f4 idea, and so it's natural to consider f4 yourself, but we just don't have enough firepower. I think we run a little short here. G takes, E takes. Black is doing well. Yeah, bishop d3, black is happy to give up this pawn if we still get f4. So some people in the chat have it. The truth has it again. And Josh, my good friend Josh is in the chat. I didn't see that. Yeah, Josh, unfortunately, this is not a continuation of the previous series. This is a look into Akobian's approach against the King's Indian. We're not refuting tonight. We're just looking at a different approach. So knight to d6 by Flame Rider in the chat is a good idea, but this is also sort of what black is hoping for. I think black kind of realizes at this point, position's a little bit tough, and knight to d6 is going to make things pretty complicated. After f4, we do get to take a rook, although I would argue maybe this knight is worth more than that rook. But at the end of the day, our bishop's still going to be trapped. So of course the idea, as quite a number of people have said now, is to go e4. And this is a fork. So this is the move that is total disaster for black. Why is this move so bad? Well, if you take here, all of a sudden, every weakness in the black camp is just sort of highlighted, accentuated. There's nothing keeping all of these pawns together. The light squares are weak. The dark squares are weak. Once this f5 pawn goes, it's just death. And if you try to move this knight out of the way, of course, I'm going to be happy to do a very similar thing where I capture on f5. And OK, maybe you can do this. And I haven't looked too far into this, but maybe we can just play bishop d3. And it's going to be a very similar story here. You just have all these holes in your position. Black cannot keep everything together. And our bishop, which was once in danger of being trapped, is now pressuring a very weak pawn on e5. So e4 is the monster move. Flame Rider is asking the right questions now. He says, what about f4 as a reply for black? And that's exactly what black has to do. Black can't allow these weaknesses to happen, so black has to try this idea of f4. You attack my piece, I attack your piece. So how does this move actually work? Well, Var is going to take this knight, and now black would be losing if he cashed in and took the bishop on g3. But you shouldn't take things that can't run away. So we get pawn takes on d5 as a response by black. Now though, Var has successfully given up this bishop. We don't need to save this guy anymore. We're up a piece, so we can give this piece back. Knight to d6 is Var's continuation, and this was our plan from the start. Rook to f8. And now, again, I think the best concept of the game from Var. This next move isn't the shocking move, but Var's next move telegraphs his plan. And his plan here is quite nice. So you've sort of achieved what you set out to achieve. You got this knight to the square. It's on the monster square. It's on d6. But now what? Now we need to continue the game, right? You don't just win because your knight got to d6. Yes, it feels like you should be a lot better, but you still have to prove it. Black, in the meantime, is building this monster center, and it's going to try to get some activity down this f file. So our task, as always, is to activate our remaining pieces and keep an eye on black's plans. So how can we activate our pieces and limit black's potential here? I'd be very impressed if you guys come up with this plan. Because white could find himself in danger if you sort of lollygag about in this position. So some people want to go bishop to d3, but again, you're walking into black's newly found huge center. You know, why do you play the King's Indian? To build a big center with black. That was a joke. So yeah, e4 is just nasty. So there's another idea in the chat to go f3 first to try and prepare this idea of bishop to d3. Maybe you can try this idea. I am very wary of opening up this dark square diagonal, especially with our dark square bishop not being long for this world. Okay, and the truth in the Twitch chat, as always, has the truth. So the biggest threat here is this massive mobile pawn center. And Var understands this. He understands that this knight is a huge, huge asset, so he has a little bit of wiggle room for dealing with this center, but he does have to deal with this center. Otherwise, if these pawns get rolling, it's going to be disaster. It's going to be disaster. So that's why, that's what the truth is focusing on. How can we stop these pawns from rolling down the board and also get our remaining pieces into play? It doesn't seem so easy. You're losing me there. You want to move the knight? Oh, b5 you mean?
No, g4. I was thinking g4, but I forgot that rook is over by his king protecting that file. So
That'd be f5, right?
f5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so queen b3 pins this pawn, which is super useful, but what's your idea after queen b3?
I'm just feeling like if pawn takes bishop, then it'd be nice to take it back with something like a rook, and just have it on that file, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay, I mean, so black is going to take, and we'll take back probably before we do anything. But then let's just say black plays some move, like queen d7. So the idea of queen d7, you know, we are defending the bishop, just going to unpin our pawn, and then that's going to allow us to play moves like e4 or d4 if we really want to. You're so close. You're very close. So I'm going to put queen b3 on the board because this was played and it's the best move. So good idea there. So takes and takes was played. But now after rook a to d8, so it still doesn't happen immediately, but what is white's intention? How is white going to break through? Yeah, I mean, relying on these tactics of this pawn being pins, like black shouldn't really be allowing those tactics. Like we can unpin this pawn. We can eventually play a move like queen e7, queen d7. This bishop's not going to be undefended forever.
You could try to, you could take.
Finish your thought.
So you could take the pawn with the rook, and then if it takes back, you take back the queen, you check it.
Exactly. So the glorious exchange sacrifice. So the truth had this in the chat. This is Var's idea. He understands that these two pawns are very, very powerful, But this knight is just going to be an absolute monster if we can get the rest of our pieces into play. Like, yes, this knight looks amazing. It's pressuring b7. It's pressuring the king side. It's blocking off black's pieces. But he's going to need some help in order to break through. And so how do we break through here? Well, the only real way that we could find to get past the center is to sacrifice a little bit of material for it. So rook takes d5. The exchange sacrifice is what Var had in mind. So he does do some preparation for it, though. He doesn't take right away. Again, grandmasters hate pinning themselves. Could run into some trouble here. Well, actually, not that much trouble. But first, whatever. He plays rook c2 and rook c to d2. Black goes bishop to f6. And finally, the time is right. Var takes on d5. And now he's crashing through into the position for the low cost of an exchange for a pawn.
Can we go back 3 moves?
Yes.
Why did black not come forward with his pawn?
Well, that was our idea of queen to b3 here. So you can't actually move either of these pawns with this move. So if you go d4, this bishop's attacked. If you go e4, we can again take advantage of that with this pin on this bishop. So if black were threatening to play the move d4, like if the move queen e7 had been played here, I'm pretty confident Var would not let e4 happen. I think he would d4 happen. I think he would go ahead and sacrifice right away. Let's go ahead and ask the computer to make sure I'm not crazy. Yeah, rook takes d5, by far the best move here. I'm not lying to you. So yeah, it's all about pushing those pawns, you're right, but he never got the chance. And then Var says, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to go ahead and take. b6 is black's idea. This rook is still pinned, so he doesn't need to take it right away. Var goes ahead, defends his pawn, unpins his rook. So now we get takes and takes. But the fact of the matter is, this position is going to be very, very sad for black. The worst has happened. We have this fractured structure with all of these weaknesses. The pawns are weak, the squares are weak, the light squares are horribly weak. We have our unopposed light square bishop and our monster knight. It's more than enough to sacrifice one little exchange. And with that exchange, we took away all of black's counterplay. It's no longer active ideas. It's just black trying to stop the onslaught of this knight and pawn, and the rest of the white pieces flooding in. So from here, we get queen g7, bishop to d3, finally time to activate, bishop back to e7, trying to get rid of this knight. We say no thank you, knight f5, takes on e7, so little tactics there, no time to take the rook because of the queen. And here, the knight defends the rook. And we pick up a second pawn, and from here, Var is a professional. The game doesn't last much longer. Black goes ahead and resigns here. King is just too weak, this pawn is just too strong, and the white king is perfectly safe with this structure. So black resigned after c6. Just to kind of explain why, after this move, I think even queen to e4, already it's just checkmate, right? Just going to be checkmate in very, very short order. Yeah, okay, very short order. Didn't quite realize it was that short. Okay, so questions about this game. This was a pretty nice game to introduce why we do these weird things, why we play bishop g5 and e3, right? Does everybody understand the purpose of not playing e4 in this opening? Okay, just general questions?
The opening for white was what?
This was a King's Indian defense. So we started with d4, and black fianchettoed. We go d4, c4, and then we get here. And rather than play the main lines with e4, we're talking about this idea of bishop g5 and e3. Oh, looks like we got a raid from Chessweeb. Thank you, thank you. I can't actually see that on my chat. Tough. There's a good question in the chat that says, why bishop g5 and e3? To answer that question, you have to watch the last 40 minutes of lecture. That's what the whole game was about. Okay, so with that, I want to take you to a more fun game, a much lower quality game. My good friend Alex, who's teaching the beginners class right now, dug up an old notation book of his. And in that notation book, he has a game from 2011, I think, when I was 12 years old, where I played against him in a Scholastics tournament. We were Scholastic Fiends back in the day, and apparently we played a game in this exact line. So now we've seen what it's like with the Grandmasters. Now we're going to take a look at what it's like at a much, much, much lower level. We'll talk about how ideas that you've seen can get confused when you're just first starting to learn them, and how you can kind of adapt to the position as it changes. So we have the exact same opening in this game. At the time, I was rated 1400. This was 11 years ago. And Alex was rated 1300. And we get this opening. Bishop g5, Alex goes d6, I go e3. Now, I don't really have any memory of this game, so I'm going to say what I think I was thinking, but your guess is as good as mine. And here Alex goes b6. So what do you guys think about this move? He was the first to deviate from the games that we've seen previously. What's going on with b6?
Open up that file for his bishop.
Yeah, so he's trying to go bishop b7, maybe bishop a6, I don't know, but you generally play this move when you want to bring your bishop out this way. So what do we think about this idea?
It's pretty weakening, so the c6 square is pretty weak at that point, so if you want to try to reroute your knight there, or
Yep.
Yep.
So I think the problem with this can be shown in a different game, which if we had time I was going to go over, but we're definitely not going to have time. So like you said, it's a little bit weakening of the c6 square maybe. But more importantly than that, it's preparing a move. So not only is it preparing bishop to b7, but really this move is preparing an eventual c5, right? So that is sort of the crux of the issue here. If black is eventually going to go c5, and let's even say they go bishop b7 first, followed by c5, what is white going to be doing against c5? There's a couple options, obviously, but there's one move that's a lot more intuitive than the rest. Yeah, d5. And then this sort of just makes your position look silly, right? You could have played c5 in this position, and white probably would play d5. I think d5 is the best move. And instead, you've spent 2 tempi to bring your pieces to these squares. And now you've played c5. White still goes d5. And in return for your efforts, your bishop is looking at a wall. And you've played b6, when in reality, probably you want to play b5. Probably you would rather do it in one tempo than two, right? Instead of b6, b5, b5 in one turn would be better. So this idea of b6, I think, is just very, very misguided. Very, very much not a good idea. So I respond to this misguided idea with a misguided idea. So I play bishop to d3. So what do you guys think of this move, this bishop to d3 move? Why is this move not so correct? It's not a terrible move by any means. White is doing fine, of course, but
I think the best you can get out of it is try to go to,
yeah, e4? Yeah, so you said the best you can get out of it is trying to get to this e4 square, which is sort of a huge problem, right? That's why this move doesn't make a lot of sense. Black has fianchettoed, making this diagonal sort of a non-starter. It's really tough to open up this diagonal to counterplay against black. And getting to e4 is really not feasible, right? That's just too many things are going to be defending it. You don't want to make all those trades. So this bishop just belongs on e2, where it can defend the knight, and more importantly, also stay out of the way of the d file. Remember our game plan. Like, let's just, for example, say that the game went back into normal territory here. We got e5, takes. Now all of a sudden, our bishop really looks silly on this square. It's walking into knight c5 threats. It's blocking the d file. It's susceptible to maybe an e4 tactic later on down the line. And it's just in our way. We would much rather have this piece on e2. So it's important to realize where your pieces belong and why they belong there. So bishop e2 would have been a much better move. Instead, bishop d3, bishop b7, queen c2 is what I played. We got knight b to d7. And now I play a terrible, terrible move. So like you were thinking, I was like, man, why did I put my bishop on d3? I guess I was doing it to go to e4. So I played the move knight to e4. And already black is doing pretty well here. So the big problem with Benoni structures is that black doesn't have enough space. However, if you can trade just one minor piece, or in this case, even two minor pieces, the Benoni structures feel a lot more comfortable. Suddenly, every piece you have has a square. So black to move here, how can you get a nice position?
Knight takes.
Yeah, so knight takes, bishop takes.
And then bishop takes.
Yeah, we can just take this guy. OK, so queen takes makes the threat.
And then
Yeah, but we can go knight f6 maybe with tempo, right? Let's just say I come back. And now, what structure do we want?
as black.
Yeah, you can play a move here to get a very, very good structure.
C5.
Yeah, c5. And now these d5 ideas, not so comfortable anymore. This bishop is by far the best minor piece on the board. And black is going to be very, very happy with how this game has gone. Now, remember that position where we had this position, but there was a bishop on b7 and a knight on b8, and black was going to have a lot of work to do to find squares for those pieces. No longer does black have that issue. He traded off those pieces, and so his remaining pieces are just good. They're just good pieces. So that's why knight e4 is a bad move. Instead, my opponent plays rook to e8. I'm like, OK, knight f to d2. I had an idea, I guess. Now my opponent plays c6. So it's not hard to understand why this is a step in the wrong direction, right? I suppose maybe he was thinking I was going to try d5, or maybe he was going to try d5. But of course, still the right way to go is to go for these c5 structures and potentially trade off some pieces on e4 first. Instead, c6, I take on f6 and castle, finally. And then I go knight e4 again. So again, every time I play knight e4 in this game, it's a terrible, terrible move. This time, the problem again is going to be after captures. And now black to move here, and black is almost just strictly winning. We have some nice ideas. And let this be a more cautionary tale for people looking to play this opening with whites. Black to move here. You're not going to win a ton of pieces or anything, but you're going to get a very, very good position. No, we don't really want to weaken our king side too much. Our king side needs to stay as is.
Would it be a queen move so you can pair e5? Or
Yeah, we actually don't really need e5 here anymore. This move c6 is going to turn out to come in handy. I sort of justified black's play.
so just d5?
Yeah, d5 is nasty. You actually cannot capture this pawn because takes makes two threats at the same time. So you would have to come back. And then here, it's no time to stop with the black pieces. The pressure's on. What's the follow-up? You could take. I like this other move better, though. Yeah, so as people in the chat are saying, c5 is really, really good. Maximum tension in the center, and now white is in a very, very bad way. And I like showing these lines because it really highlights how bad of a move bishop g5 is. So I want to emphasize you don't play this opening because you get this nice active bishop on g5 that puts all this pressure on black. You play this opening to avoid making weaknesses and then aiming for those other lines where, yes, you're going to spend some time getting your bishop to a more reasonable square. You almost always are having to retreat this bishop. But you get these other advantages. So here, what's the big deal? Let's say you take. I can even start with this, and white might just be losing heavy material very, very quickly with these kinds of ideas. This bishop's in no man's land. You're pinned down the c file. It's over. It's over. So my opponent missed that opportunity, though, and played something else. He didn't take on e4, so queen c7 instead. And now I'm back to being fine. Took on f6, pawn takes f6, bishop f4, queen to d7. So now white is back in control of this game. Black sort of missed this opportunity to break free and challenge the center. For those King's Indian players looking for advice on this game, you can't delay challenging the center forever. That's sort of what happened in this game. I gave my opponent every opportunity to break free. c5, d5, e5, all of these moves were options at various points, but he just never did any of them. And if you never challenge the center, eventually center is going to be useful. So after pawn takes, attacking my bishop, I retreat. That pinned the queen, so the queen moved out of the way. Now we find some way to get active here. And from this point on, I played classic scholastic 1400 level chess. I just tried to make a threat every turn until something worked. But in this case, turned out my threats were kind of good moves. Yeah, Steven, just joining the chat. So our first game that we went over was about having this pawn on e3 and how that can be a huge, huge benefit. So I would go back to the first game in the lecture. That's what it's all about. Yeah, so I played queen a4. I was like, I attack a pawn, maybe pin a pawn, maybe something happens, right? Queen a4 actually I think is the best move. So what was the other move you suggested though? e4. e4. Yeah, I don't know if I like this move. Black has this sort of very compact structure over here, and that's going to allow him to sort of guard these kinds of squares very, very well. And I think e4 would be asking for something like d5 to come on the board, when all of a sudden, Black's bishop, which is staring at this pawn, might all of a sudden be getting active. You're again going to see these d5, c5 type breaks coming through. And eventually, this bishop will wake up and attack your d pawn. But yeah, queen a4, just a very nice move, just attacks this pawn. And after something like rook to a8, there's a lot of ways we could continue. We could try b4. We could try just bringing your rooks to the center. Maybe even a move like d5 is worth considering. Maybe even like queen a3 is something to think about as well. So lots of options. Instead, Alex played queen to d8, trying to trap my queen somehow, but it just doesn't work. I took the free pawn. There's no rook a8 because this bishop's attacked. Goes rook to e7. But I'm wise to his tricks. Just back up with queen to a3. And now after c5, white is just winning this game, and I don't think I ever really looked back. I think I managed to keep this idea. Okay, so the game continued with rook to f to e1, kind of a weird move, but I was not that good at chess. Queen to d7, rook a to b1, very weird move. I think I wanted to play b4 or something. Instead, what should white be doing here? White should be finding some way to make this pawn advantage sort of both permanent and activate the remaining pieces. So how could we go about doing that in this position? Rook e1 was like, okay, fine. But after queen to d7, what do you think we should be aiming for here? How do we go from up a pawn to just winning the game? Yeah, Hillary in the chat has a good idea. So b4, Yeah, I mean, b4 is going to add some complications to this game. It might be a very good move, but you might be allowing black to sort of continue to activate. Maybe something like f5. And all of a sudden, maybe you wish this pawn was on b2. Do you mean this one? No, so that's going to give up these dark squares too much. We thought about e4 in a different position, but yeah, it's a bit too weakening, and black is going to have some nice active ideas in response. So where is sort of the pressure in the position for black? Black has some pressure against us right now. There's sort of some threats looming. Black has some ideas, and we can resolve those threats here and just make it so black has to sort of sit back and let us do our thing. Yeah, d5 is great here. So all the pressure is coming from black targeting our center, threatening to open up these dark squares and come attack us, threatening to open up the c file as well. So playing d5 would be fantastic. Just shuts off this bishop as well, cements this pawn on a bad backward square, and just sort of removes the tension from the position. We're up a pawn. We don't need complexities. We need to simplify. And from there, you could do a lot of things. I think just simply queen to b3, putting pressure here, pushing a4, a5, and getting the rooks into the game is a good next step. OK, instead I played some nonsense. He played some nonsense. I also played some nonsense. Played f5. And I sort of realized that I think my moves were nonsense. And yeah, so I go queen to b3. So f5 was pressuring down this diagonal. And now all of a sudden, since I wasted all this time doing nothing, my opponent's very much back in the game. He goes c takes d4, highlighting the fact that I'm pinned down the e file. I had a plan, though. I took here on b6. Now my opponent comes up with this nice move, rook to e6. I play queen to b4, trying to unpin, threaten to resolve this tension here. So my opponent takes. No, he goes queen c6 first. Subtle threat. Bishop f1. Takes, and now my opponent gets a little bit too fancy for his own good. Plays this move, rook to e4. So white to move and win here. It's a very, very nice position for white if we can just stop the pressure, stop the threats. Of course, in any endgame, we're going to be doing very well. We have these 3 connected pawns on the queen side. This d6 pawn probably isn't going to survive. The question is, how can we get there? How can we survive, live to see the day? Well, he might be trying to take our bishop, right? So we gotta be careful.
But if he does, you capture out the queen. Okay.
Yeah, maybe we do have some tactics there. Actually, that's sort of the idea. So we want to get some pieces off. And we can actually do that by force here.
I was thinking rook b1.
Absolutely. So I don't know why, but I find this move to be really funny. Black had 2 rooks on this open file. I had 1 rook, and black, moves one of the rooks but doesn't capture. And then all 4 rooks get to share the same file now. So what's the point? the point is exactly what you were thinking. This rook on e8 is a little bit under-defended, and if takes, we simply take on e8. And so this sort of just immediately gets rid of all these threats that black was trying to have. Black tried bishop to d4 to keep up the pressure, but I can just trade. We get rook takes, queen takes, and now I just take on d6. With the rooks off the board, my queen centralized, I'm going to be able to defend my king more than sufficiently here. The game actually ended pretty quickly. We went king g7, I went bishop to g3. He goes h5, and here, kind of amazingly, after queen to f4, there's no way for black to avoid this queen trade. There's just no way. You can't move the queen and defend the bishop. So the queens came off, and then this endgame is just hopeless. 3 connected passed pawns is enough. He went for the king and pawn endgame, and white won pretty easily after a4. His pawns, of course, cannot be captured. So that was my 1400 level take on this opening system back when I was either 11 or 12 years old. Lots of fun.
Alex said it was the 2014 Bullinger Memorial.
Oh, it was 2014. Okay, I was way older. I was 15. How did I play this game when I was 15? Oh, man. All right, well, still young enough. I wasn't that good at chess, but hopefully you learned some good ideas here. So again, the point of this game is to kind of emphasize how important it is to understand the point behind the opening. So the point behind bishop g5 and e3 isn't to have some bishop on g5, and that's a good thing. It's to control these weakened squares. Okay, so you don't need to do crazy things if your opponent does something you don't know. You just need to play logical, intuitive chess. Understand why your pieces are where they are, and then you can play the system well. Okay, any final questions for me before I hand it off to our Grandmaster in Residence? Okay, thank you all very much for joining me here tonight then. Up next, for the final time, maybe for a little bit, maybe we'll see him a little bit in August, Grandmaster Ilya Nizhnik will be up next, ending his stay as Grandmaster in Residence. It's been great to have him. Be sure to stay tuned for that lecture. As always, my name is Caleb Denby. This has been The Road to 2000, and I'll see you all next week.